In September 2020, 3 geneticists in Copenhagen were staring at data that didn't make sense. Dr. Ashot Margarian, Dr. Daniel Lawson, and Dr. Martin Sikora had just finished analyzing DNA from what everyone assumed was a Viking warrior's grave in Orkney. The burial had everything: a sword, a spear, silver coins, the works. Classic Viking, textbook Scandinavian raider. Except the DNA was screaming something impossible. This Viking wasn't from Scandinavia. He wasn't even slightly Scandinavian. This Viking warrior was a Pict, a local Scottish boy, born and raised in Orkney, descended from people who'd lived there for thousands of years. Within hours, the team was messaging their project leader, Professor Eske Villerslev, with results that would shake archaeology to its core. Because it wasn't just one grave, it was burial after burial. Vikings with Pictish DNA, Norse warriors who'd never seen Norway, men buried with Scandinavian swords who were as Scottish as haggis. The most Vikings in Scotland weren't Vikings at all. This is the story of how DNA destroyed 1,000 years of assumptions. How genetic science proved that the Viking conquest of Scotland might not have involved many actual Vikings. And after months of investigating this discovery, I'm going to show you why the most successful Vikings in history might have been the ones who figured out you didn't need Scandinavian blood to join the club. You just needed to know how to play the part. Let's talk about grave VK202. That's the scientific designation for a middle-aged man buried at Buckquoy in Orkney around 950 AD. And this guy was Viking royalty, archaeologically speaking. They found him in what's called a furnished burial, Viking speak for buried with all your best stuff. An iron spear, a knife with a bone handle, a black shale whetstone for keeping your blade sharp, a copper alloy ring-headed pin, the kind Norse nobles used to fasten their cloaks. And here's the kicker: half a silver penny from Anglo-Saxon King Edmund, dated 940 to 946 AD. That coin is crucial. It makes this one of the last pagan Viking burials in Scotland. Peak Viking Age, height of Norse power. If you were doing a museum display of classic Viking warrior, this is the grave you'd recreate. Except when they sequenced his DNA, they found something that shouldn't exist. This classic Viking warrior was 85% Celtic. His Y chromosome, the bit that traces male ancestry, was haplogroup RA151. That's not Scandinavian, that's indigenous British Isles. Been here since the Bronze Age. His mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, was H1AI1. Also local, also been here forever. Think about what that means. This isn't some Viking who married a local girl. This isn't mixed heritage. This is a completely indigenous Orcadian who somehow ended up in a Viking grave with Viking weapons following Viking burial customs. He's not alone either. VK201, another Viking from Buckquoy, same story. Local genetics, Viking grave goods, though this one dates back to the 5th to 6th century CE, showing this pattern goes way back. VK203 from Brough Road, also Iron Age, also Pictish DNA, also Norse-style burial. The paper that revealed all this dropped in Nature on September 16, 2020. Population genomics of the Viking world. Sounds boring. It's not. It's 442 ancient genomes from across Europe, the largest Viking DNA study ever conducted. 6 years of work. Over 80 authors led by 3 co-first authors: Ashot Margarian, Daniel Lawson, and Martin Sikora. Labs in Copenhagen, Cambridge, Oxford, Stockholm. And buried in the data tables was dynamite, because Orkney wasn't an anomaly. The team found genetically Pictish Vikings all over the Northern Isles. They found them with better grave goods than actual Scandinavians. They found them in positions of obvious social importance. Professor Esker Villerslev, who led the whole project, didn't mince words. The history books will need to be updated. Think about that. When's the last time a scientist said the history books were wrong? Not need revision, not require nuance, wrong. Dr. Daniel Lawson from Bristol was even more direct. Individuals with 2 genetically British parents who had Viking burials were found in Orkney. 2 British parents, Viking burial. Let that sink in. But here's the part that really breaks your brain. They also found these Celtic Vikings in Norway, in actual Scandinavia. Which means some Picts didn't just become Vikings in Scotland. They became Vikings so successfully that they ended up in the Viking homeland, buried with honors, accepted as equals, more Viking than Vikings. For 150 years, Viking archaeology has been simple. Find a Norse brooch? Vikings were here. Scandinavian sword? Viking burial. Boat funeral? Definitely Vikings. The entire chronology of the Viking Age in Scotland is built on these assumptions. Every museum display, every textbook, every documentary, all based on the idea that Norse objects equal Norse people. The Buckquoy excavations from the 1970s found classic Viking longhouses built over Pictish structures. Obviously, Vikings replacing Picts, right? The famous boat burial at Skar on Sunday. 3 people buried with a boat, swords, shields, gaming pieces. Obviously, a Norwegian family, right? Wrong. All of it potentially wrong. Because what if those Viking longhouses were built by Picts who'd learned Norse construction? What if that boat burial contains locals who'd adopted Scandinavian customs? What if every single Viking artifact we found in Scotland was used by indigenous people who'd gone Norse culturally but stayed Pictish genetically? You know, when I discovered how completely the Picts transformed themselves, it sent me down a rabbit hole about who these people really were before their incredible disappearance act. That's what led me to write The Painted People, diving deep into the sophisticated civilization that existed before the Vikings arrived, their stone fortresses, their mysterious symbols that still baffle scholars, their maritime networks that connected Scotland to continental Europe. These weren't primitive people. They were master strategists who understood that sometimes survival means becoming your enemy. The book explores everything from their genuine achievements to their final transformation. Plus, there's an exclusive recipe collection based on isotope analysis of Pictish remains. You can literally taste what these shape-shifting warriors ate. It's 65% off right now. Link in the description if you're ready to discover the truth about Scotland's most enigmatic people. Now, skeptics will say, how can we trust this DNA stuff? Maybe it's contaminated, maybe they got it wrong. Fair questions. Here's why the science is rock solid. The team used 6 different methods to analyze ancestry: whole genome sequencing, F4 statistics, QPA-DM modeling, admixture analysis, IBD segments, PCA clustering. If you don't know what those mean, don't worry. What matters is they all showed the same thing: local ancestry, not Scandinavian. They sequenced 442 individuals total. That's not a sample, that's a population. They had controls from known Pictish sites, controls from known Norwegian sites, controls from Iron Age Britain. The patterns are unmistakable. The Orkney Vikings cluster with Iron Age Britons, not with Norwegians. Both their maternal and paternal lineages are local. This isn't opinion, it's mathematics. And before anyone says, but maybe Picts and Norwegians were genetically similar, they weren't. The study shows clear, distinct genetic signatures. Scandinavians have specific markers from their hunter-gatherer ancestors, their Anatolian farmer ancestors, their steppe pastoralist ancestors. Picts have different proportions, different markers, different histories written in their DNA. You can tell them apart as easily as you can tell apart a Norwegian and a Nigerian today. Here's my theory about what really happened in Orkney, and the evidence backs it up perfectly. The Vikings show up in the late 700s. They raid, they pillage, they're unstoppable. The Picts face a choice: resist and likely die, or find another way. But some clever Picts, the entrepreneurs of the Dark Ages, saw opportunity in crisis. Think about it from their perspective. These Norse raiders need local knowledge. Where are the good harbors? Which chiefs have gold? When do the storms come? A Pictish guide who knows these things is invaluable. A Pictish warrior who can negotiate with both communities, priceless. A Pictish noble who can run Norse operations locally. That's not just survival, that's a business model. The DNA evidence shows this wasn't gradual cultural mixing. It was rapid, wholesale adoption of Norse identity by specific individuals and families. Within a generation, these Pictish Vikings wouldn't seem unusual at all. Their kids grow up bilingual, bicultural, wearing Norse clothes, following Norse customs, going on raids. To any outsider, they're Vikings. To themselves, they're Vikings. The only witness to their true heritage is their DNA, silent for 1,000 years. But here's what truly shatters our assumptions. Some of these genetically Pictish Vikings ended up in Norway itself, the motherland, the source. And they weren't just tolerated, they were honored with prestigious burials. How does someone with zero Scandinavian ancestry become so Viking that actual Norwegians bury them with respect? Simple. By that point, Viking had become a profession, not a bloodline, like being a merchant or a mercenary. The sagas actually support this. They're full of Irish Vikings, Slavic Vikings, Finnish Vikings, characters the historians assumed were Scandinavians with foreign nicknames. But what if they were exactly what they seemed? Successful professionals in the Viking enterprise. Dr. Martin Sikora put it perfectly. We found Vikings with Southern European ancestry, Asian ancestry, mixtures we never contemplated before. The research team found individuals from Italy, Ukraine, even people with Sami heritage, genetically closer to East Asians than Europeans, buried as Vikings in Norway. If you could sail, fight, and contribute to the enterprise, nobody checked your genetic papers. Modern Orkney DNA confirms everything. Today's Orcadians are 25 to 30% Scandinavian, not the 70 to 80% you'd expect from population replacement. Compare that to Iceland, heavily Norwegian, or the Faroe Islands, almost purely Scandinavian. Those were real colonizations. Orkney was something radically different. The Scandinavian ancestry that does exist in Orkney comes mostly from a few male lineages, suggesting a small number of high-status Norse men who had many children, earls and their retinues, not massive settler populations. The Vikings won Orkney not by replacing the Picts, but by recruiting them. It's the difference between corporate takeover and franchise expansions. The study focused heavily on male burials, but female graves tell an equally revolutionary story. Pictish women with Norse oval brooches, the most diagnostic Viking female artifact. Local women buried with Scandinavian grave goods following Norse customs and their children raised as Vikings. The cultural transformation wasn't just warriors switching sides, it was entire families, entire communities choosing Viking identity as a survival strategy. This explains what archaeology never could. How did small Viking war bands control such vast territories? They didn't. Locals controlled them using Viking methods. Why do Viking sites show continuity with earlier cultures? Same people, new management style. How did Viking culture spread faster than any army could march? Because it didn't require invasion, just adoption. Here's the beautiful irony. The Picts supposedly disappeared when the Vikings arrived, vanished from history, replaced by Norse settlers. Every history book tells this story, except they didn't vanish. They transformed, so successfully that we've been calling them Vikings for 1,000 years. They won by appearing to lose. They survived by seeming to disappear. They conquered their conquerors by becoming them. It's genius, really. You can't beat the Vikings militarily. They're too strong. You can't outlast them. They're here to stay. But you can join them, become them, and eventually outnumber them. By the time the Viking Age ends, most Vikings in Orkney are genetically Pictish. The Conquest reversed itself through cultural jiu-jitsu. The DNA from Orkney forces us to accept something extraordinary. We've been wrong about the Vikings for 150 years. Wrong about who they were. Wrong about how they spread. Wrong about what Viking even meant. The buried Pict with the Viking's sword isn't an anomaly. He's the rule we didn't know existed. Viking wasn't an ethnicity. It was an opportunity. A career path, a lifestyle choice, a survival strategy, a brand you could buy into with sufficient commitment. The Norse didn't conquer Orkney by replacing Picts. They conquered it by converting them, by offering membership in something bigger, more profitable, more powerful than what they had. And the Picts took the deal, embraced it so completely that their descendants forgot they were ever anything else. Performed Viking identity so perfectly that they fooled archaeologists for over a century. Only now, with DNA technology, can we see through their 1,000-year-old disguise. The Vikings of Orkney were Picts. The Picts became Vikings. Both statements are true. Both change everything. The conquest was a conversion. The invasion was an invitation. The replacement was a costume change. That Pictish farmer's son who picked up a Norse sword and sailed off raiding, he wasn't betraying his heritage. He was adapting it, surviving through transformation, winning by joining the winners. His DNA stayed Pictish. His culture went Viking. His descendants inherited both and forgot the distinction, until we dug him up and sequenced his genome and discovered the greatest plot twist in medieval history. The Vikings won by recruiting their enemies. The Picts won by joining their conquerors. Everyone won by agreeing Vikings were whoever showed up to raid. History isn't written by the victors, it's written by whoever controls the narrative. And for 1,000 years, those Pictish Vikings controlled it so well that we believed they were Scandinavian. That's not failure. That's the most successful identity transformation in human history. If this investigation fascinated you, please like and subscribe. I'll keep following this story as more Viking burials get tested across Europe. Every result could shatter another assumption. And if you want to explore the true story of the Picts before their magnificent transformation, The Painted People is still 65% off through the link below. It's a digital download with instant access, revealing everything from their mysterious symbols to their maritime dominance, from their monumental architecture to how they managed to fool history itself. Plus, grab the exclusive recipe collection during checkout, real Pictish food based on isotope analysis. Every purchase supports investigations that prove the past is never as simple as the stories we tell about it. Drop a comment with your take. Were the Picts geniuses for joining the Vikings, or did they lose themselves in becoming their conquerors?